Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning on Embracing the Future, Continuous Posture Assessment and AI Adoption in SecOps. I'm Amy Perez. I'm Head of Marketing and Communications here at Adarma. I've just got a few more people joining, so sorry, I'll just let them into the lobby. So today I'm joined by Tim Davies, Principal Consultant at Adarma. Tim will discuss the concept of continuous posture assessment and a framework that can act as a North Star on your journey to building this capability. Unfortunately, our Head of Security Consulting has been taken ill. He was due to talk about AI adoption in security operations. So rather than delegate that at short notice, we will set up another session to speak to that in more depth. So this webinar is part of a three-part series based on our latest report titled How to Design a Future-Ready SOC, Staying Adaptable and Agile in the Face of Change. And Tim's about to put a link into the chat, so you can all download the report if you haven't already seen it. You can also access parts 1 and 2 via the links that will pop in the chat just now. Part 1 covered the architecture playbook for designing and building a SOC that tackles today's challenges and is adaptable and agile enough to prepare for future changes to the threat landscape, the technology market, and also the businesses that you will protect. Part 2 discussed data pipelining and how you can more effectively manage large data volumes and reduce ingest, processing, and storage costs. That one was done in partnership with our partners, Cribble. So today we'll be discussing the challenges of traditional SOC design as it pertains to continuous posture assessment and a framework that will help you to build out a capability of continuous posture assessment. During the presentation, if you do have any questions, please pop them into the chat or into the Q&A window, and we should have plenty of time at the end to answer those. I expect we'll run a little bit shorter than the original 45 minutes today because we're not doing the AI portion, so around about half an hour, I imagine. So with that, I will pass over to you, Tim. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy, and good morning, everybody. So just as a recap from parts 1 and part 2, we're putting up this slide really as the overall future-ready SOC architecture. You know, this just to remind everybody from the other sessions that this covers off how the future-ready SOC needs to have an open architecture. You know, it needs to be able to incorporate the latest changes and technologies coming down, the ability for different vendors and different departments to be able to contribute to the architecture. It also needs to take a federated approach to detection and response. And it also needs to handle vast volumes of data as well. And that's where we covered off in part 2 with Chris from Cribble around data pipelining as well. So that's in the report, and that's in the other parts of the webinars. So just focusing on continuous posture assessment for today, and just to set the scene for that, what we are defining as continuous posture assessment is really about bringing together vulnerability management and the additional information that attack surface management and breach and attack simulations can bring to that. So you can then provide a prioritized risk-based view on dealing with all the weaknesses that you have across the attack surface. So we'll go into a bit more detail now around continuous posture assessment. So if I can move on to the next slide, please, Amy. So if we go back to this slide, which we put up in the report and on the other webinars, I just want to highlight a few of these SOC challenges, really in the context of continuous posture assessment. So tool sprawl, obviously, you know, will apply into continuous posture assessment as well. You know, we're all seeing a lot more tools out there now that can scan for vulnerabilities, report compliance, and control sort of status as well. So both cloud and on-prem, there's a lot of change there from a tool perspective. We still have the same vendor lock-in challenges. How do we get that data out of those tools and integrated? How do we make sure that we can bring a holistic view together of the functionality and of the data across our tool set? Obviously, data explosion very much applies when a continuous posture assessment. And we'll go into this in a lot more detail on the next slides. But, gathering information across vulnerabilities, weaknesses, threats, controls, assets, it's going to bring a lot of data. And again, we'll talk about how we can manage that. Also, devolution of the cloud. A lot of organizations are moving to multi-cloud environments. This is, again, bringing a number of challenges about how you bring that data together and how you control those environments. And then finally, as well, the complexity also applies within the continuous posture assessment side as well. We've got an ever increasing attack surface, out into the cloud environments, across and into also our OT, IoT, into our supply chain, and also into our customer and partner environments as well. So again, we'll take a look at that. So if we move on to the next slide, and let's just reflect really on, in terms of continuous posture assessment, what are the kind of qualities we really want to see in the future from a SOC perspective? The SOC has got to provide trustable visibility across the environment. We've got to know that the asset information that we gather and the corresponding information around it, we can have a good high level of confidence in that information as well. So we need to correlate, we need to cross-reference in order to get that trust built up. We also fundamentally need to provide a risk-based view of how we're going to deal with the weaknesses across that attack surface. That is really kind of the core part of continuous posture assessment, is being able to take this risk-based view. We know that nobody can fix every vulnerability and weakness across that attack surface, so we're going to have to really make sure we're taking that prioritized view. We also need to hold the business and the IT operations accountable for the compliance. It's a big task if the security team are going to have to keep fighting against the business to make sure, we are patching on time, we are managing those misconfigurations, and we are building to the, the baseline standards that we need. So we do need to make sure we're working in partnership with the business and the IT organizations. We've got to use automation as well. We're going to demonstrate shortly in the next slide that it's not just good enough to do a snapshot views once or twice a year. This thing needs to be done continuously. And that's what I coin the kind of threat speed as well, keeping up with the way the threat actors are continuously evolving, their approach to probing at our attack surface as well. Fundamentally as well, and this applies really to all the SOC challenges, this is a data science challenge. We do need to understand what data we've got out there across the organization. We do need to understand what that data value is, and also whether we've got the source of truth or whether we're getting it secondhand, slightly interpreted in a different way from where it was originated as well. So we really do need to understand that data across our organization. Lastly, but not least in terms of importance, it's vital that we have a clear mission remit for the SOC and that business ownership and support. We've all been there trying to get the business to make those configuration changes and those patching changes. Unless we're really tuned in and we've got that overarching business support, it's an uphill struggle to get the business to address those remediations. So we really do need to make sure the SOC has got the right alignment with the business in terms of its remit and coverage, as well as that support as well. So that's what we're looking for in the future from the SOC. So how do we get there? I think then if we move on to the next slide, we've got a framework view. So I want to walk you through this framework view about how you want to build up this particular capability around continuous posture assessment. So if we start at the bottom of this framework view, we know that we've got a number of data sources that we need to extract information from. We need information from them, not just on the assets and identities, but also their business context. We need to know also their controls, their vulnerabilities and weaknesses as well. So there's a lot of information we need to pull from these sources. We need to get information out of the IT asset management system. It's a great source of information related to the IT provisioning and the changes that are going through related to the help desk. There's a lot of rich information around the IT asset management. But it's not the be all and the end all. We need to get information out of the cloud, both native and cloud-based sort of sources of information. Cloud tends to be a much better natively at holding information around assets and vulnerabilities. So it's a great source of information that we can pull on. We also need to gather information from our development environments. We need to know those assets and information. We also need to know the configuration and the software that they're deploying as well. So we've got good insights into our applications as well as the assets within the development environment. We also need to obviously to bring in information from our on-prem environments, not just IT, but across the IoT and OT as well. And I think we also need to extend this out into our supply chain. We need to know what connections we've got, what the information we have around our supply chain attack surface as well is. And finally, we've got some great information we can get through our threat intelligence teams as well. They can give us insights into what visibility they have from an external perspective on assets and identities. So they can bring in some really valuable information. And we can also use AI as well, not only to help make some sense of this information we're gathering, but also help validate it as well. So those are the data sources. And I think, as you can appreciate, there's a lot of information that we can be gathering here. And I think I'll just take us back to some of the data provisioning and pipelining discussions we had in the previous part 2 of the webinar, where we talked to Chris in Cribble. And I think data pipelining can be really useful here in interpreting this information. You know, for example, we need to normalize it. We need to correlate between whether it's a host name, a host ID, an asset ID, whatever terminology we're using. We need to standardize and know that we can reference the same information across multiple sources. We also might want to filter out, so we can manage that volume of data in the pipeline before it gets into the repositories and the CMDB. So again, a lot of great things that we can do in the data pipelining to help this challenge around getting all that data in. It's got some really useful integrations out of the box as well, so that's going to be a great start. And some of those integrations may also be already in place as part of using data pipelining for bringing information in from log files into detection and response. So if we move up the framework and we start looking at the CMDB side, so we've got all that information, we need to bring it together. We need to combine it as well with some business information. We need to validate it. We need to make sure that we've got the criticality assigned to that information. So that can be done in commercial tools. You know, the obvious ones that we see most prevalent out there is ServiceNow, but there's also this can be done in a custom kind of data lake environment as well. So the choice is down to each individual customer. So once we've got that CMDB in place, we can then start to think about some of the quick wins we can get out of it. We can start looking at our compliance against that CMDB. We can start mapping some of the regulatory frameworks against that CMDB, such as the PII, such as PCI, in order to get out what our sort of security controls against the assets looks like as well. Other industry standards as well are great to sort of compare ourselves against, such as CIS and also Cyber Essentials. Again, lots that we can map and just get a good feeling where we've got some gaps, where we can go back to the business and IT teams in order to correct any of those compliance. And obviously that also gives us a great view that we can start to map ourselves against the regulatory reporting that we need to do, and also our commercial compliance from contractual perspective with our customers. Also, taking this initial view helps us look at some of the obvious gaps that we've got within the asset environment. There may be some gaps that we know that we don't really need to do much more with, and we can just take immediate action against. So we may have, for example, a lack of MFA against particular accounts or environments. We also may have some assets that we know just need to be decommissioned and taken out of the attack surface. Let's minimize that attack surface where we possibly can as well. So And another example again is, if we've got a web server, internet facing application web server, and we know that we've got some of the, top 5 OWASP sort of vulnerabilities coming up on that environment, then we could take a policy decision that we don't need to process further from any kind of risk perspective. We know that we just want to fix, because those are the most likely exploited vulnerabilities, and those are the most high risk assets that attackers are going to target to start off with. So there's some quick wins. There's some obvious things there that we can push out in order to get the business and the IT teams to address. Once we've got these quick wins out of the way in the compliance map, we can then look about really enriching that information that we've captured so far. So I'm going to walk through some of the additional sources of information that we can bring in to enrich this information. So we can start thinking about threat simulations. We can use our breach and attack simulation tools. We can use some basic automation testing tools as well, in order to really exploit and see where those vulnerabilities can be exploited from an attack threat perspective as well. We've also can do some modeling as well. We can model in terms of attack and adversaries, how they might attack our environment, and how that aligns with our weaknesses and assets as well. And we can also bring in the latest cyber threat intelligence. What are the latest techniques being used? What is our latest threat profile from an attacker perspective as well? Some really useful information there we can bring in from a threat perspective. There's also some great sources of information from across our business. So we can bring in here what are critical projects that we've got at the moment that we might want to put some extra criticality around the assets related to those projects. Are we in a merger and acquisition situation from a business perspective, where again we might want to put certain sensitivity around certain assets and data in our organization? So again, bringing in business intelligence. And we can also bring in some SOC intelligence here as well, in terms of where we've got detections that can cover off on these vulnerabilities that we've got on the assets, giving us some mitigating, compensating controls. We can also look at the actual attack vectors against the assets themselves and see which ones align to the vulnerabilities. And then we can even delve further into then mapping out what those attack paths would look like, and understand whether any of these assets are particular choke points, increasing their kind of criticality in terms of their ability to then aid a threat actor into lateral movements and moving further around our internal environment. So really giving further depth into the implications of those vulnerabilities. And then finally, we need to then bring in automation. We've said right from the beginning that this is something which is going to be needed to be done on a regular basis. Daily, is the kind of schedule a lot of customers are looking at the moment. So we need to bring automation in, not only at gathering that data and information, but also combining the richness and combining the assessment of the data as well. So once we've got that enrichment of information into the CMDB, we can then start looking at a risk-based view of this information. And this is really interesting, where we can then start to calculate the likelihood of that weakness being exploited, and what the consequential kind of impact is of that exploitation. So there are lots of ways that we can do this. I think it's probably initially recommended that customers look at their organizational risk management frameworks, take on the kind of standard tooling and assessment techniques within those frameworks, looking at the way that the organization quantifies risks as well. I think it's important that when we generate the risk quantification in a continuous posture environment, that it's aligned with the business. We need to be able to speak back to the business in the same language when we're talking about risks. But there are some tools that we can use out there. There are some decision trees that we can use to help us work our way through each of these inputs in terms of their sequence and their criticality to give us an overall threat and risk management score. And then from an asset impact perspective, we can look at the rating which the business has applied to the individual asset and any data that that asset holds. But again, with that attack pathing mapping that we've done, we can look at the blast radius then of any kind of exploitation of that vulnerability. And this can be really useful then in giving us a quantifiable way of putting a value against the exploitation of that vulnerability. And then we can speak back to the business in terms of a quantification from a currency, a financial perspective, helping them then justify the prioritization and the input to actually mitigating those vulnerabilities. So some really interesting stuff that we can do around cyber risk management. And we can also integrate that then with our communication channels back to the business. We need to be integrated with our operational risk management teams. We need to be feeding back into a centralized, consistent risk register on that. We also need to be feeding back into the SOC from an incident management perspective. It may be vital if we can't fix and patch vulnerabilities quickly that we notify the SOC so they can take quick action against any kind of exploitation around those vulnerabilities. Put in maybe some extra detections, onboard some extra data around those vulnerabilities as well. And then finally, we need to feed the output from this cyber risk management into the business investment decision making, where we know there are consistent vulnerabilities across the business. We can get the business then to quantify additional investment to bring down that risk from a mitigation perspective as well. So that's a real kind of whistle-stop tour through a framework approach. I hope that's been helpful. I think you've from what you've probably heard, there's a lot more devil in the detail around this particular framework. But I hope that gives an approach which we can talk further on. Thanks very much, and just hand it back to you now, Amy.
Gonna come off mute. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, that was really useful. Thank you very much. So we do have some time for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please do pop them into the chat now. While you're having a think, I've got one for you, Tim. So based on the framework, obviously there's a lot to build out there, and there's a lot of moving pieces. For someone who's looking to build this capability, where do you start? Like, what's a good first step on your journey to this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think probably my first answer is I think a lot of customers are still on a journey with continuous posture assessment. I think we are seeing customers getting a grip now with the asset discovery and the CMDB. And I think that's the place to start. You need to be able to understand, the assets across your attack surface before you can start to understand the weaknesses and be able to start applying risk-based assessment of those weaknesses as well. So I think getting that discovery and the asset management is got to be the obvious place to start. And maybe don't start in terms of trying to capture every asset. Maybe focus around starting with cloud. It's a great place to start because natively, inherently, it comes with a lot of tools that you can use to start off with. So maybe starting with cloud-based asset discovery and management is the best place to start, really.
Perfect. And then there's a question there, kind of, I guess, building on that, maybe from a more holistic perspective. What tooling is likely to be required in knitting all of this together?
So it's another good question. In terms of tooling, we've talked about the CMDB and the asset discovery side of things as well. It's going to be down to each scenario, I think, in terms of whether you take a custom tool. So you can create yourself, your own data lake, using something like Microsoft ADX or Snowflake in order to bring all that information together. But you can take some commercial off-the-shelf products as well. There's vendors coming out of the vulnerability management side that are working and expanding into continuous posture assessment. But there's also new players coming into the market, particularly from the hyperscalers as well, that are coming into the continuous posture assessment side as well. So So, there's a mixture of choices there. I think it's worth everybody looking at those options, looking at the integrations that you need to put in place. And then finally, I think from that risk management perspective, you can build in your risk management decisions into the data lake or into your posture management tools, or you can then export it out into your organizational risk management tools again. So there are a lot of choices. It's not a simple kind of blueprint there from a tooling perspective, but look at options and make decisions about your own case, I think.
Sure. Perfect. Okay, well, it doesn't look like we've got any more questions there. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Tim is kindly making himself available, or one of our other principal consultants at Adarma, if you would like to discuss anything we've raised in the webinar today. If you'd like to, please get in touch. You can email hello@adarma.com. And we can set that up for you. Also, if you're just generally interested in the managed services we provide around SOC or any consulting services, again, just drop us a note at hello@adarma.com and we will get someone from the team in touch with you. So with that, thank you all very much. We'll make the recording available and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.